Hello and welcome back to the Not the Old Firm YouTube channel. My name is Ben Banks. We've replaced James this week. He's had one a wee day off. So replaced him with Jordan Carlisle. Jordan, how are you?
Not too bad, mate. Thanks for having me. Huge.
Good stuff, I know it is. It's a big weekend of Scottish football in the Premiership, a whole 4 games, and obviously Scottish Cup final coming up this weekend. And you can view our preview of that with Andy Webster and Danny Granger on the site on Saturday morning. We've had lots of written pieces up with them as well, so do check that out over the weekend. By Premiership action for us, 4 games over the weekend: Hibs v Dundee United, Rangers v Motherwell, Ross County v Accies, and St Mirren v St Johnstone. We'll be at 3 of them, excluding Rangers versus Motherwell. Something about not the Old Firm and going to Ibrox perhaps doesn't ring with some people, but we'll be at the other 3, so you can keep an eye out for that. On the Saturday, we'll start with Hibs Dundee United, move through this in chronological order. Hibs off the back of their League Cup victory midweek against Alloa, really tight one, that 2-1. And we heard from Jack Ross after that. Rangers going out the tournament leaves Hibs as favourite as that one, but Jack Ross isn't reading too much into that.
Well, I think recent history shows that you normally have at least one of those teams in the latter stage of the competition, if not both of them. It's an unusual occurrence to have neither. So I think whenever that happens, those teams that are left in the competition see it as increasing their chances of winning it. So we're no different to the other 3 teams that are in it. I think Jim touched on that after his victory during the week about all the teams now will have that ambition to go and win the trophy. I've spoken often about it, about being one of our targets for the season. And by winning the game against Alloa, we obviously took a step closer to doing that. I think possibly, Brian, I'm conscious that every single game I take takes me a game further away from when I was a player. So obviously your mindset changes a little bit as a manager, and probably I can be a little bit more pragmatic about it. But probably if I've been in those players' shoes, I understand why they might have reacted that way. But the truth for me now is it only really becomes relevant if you go on to be successful in the tournament. So it only becomes of any significance if you go and win these next 2 games, if you can win the semi-final and then win the final thereafter. So I think any time you're unsure as to how the competition will open up for you, as I mentioned earlier, I think for the 4 teams that are left now, they'll all view themselves as having a more than realistic chance of winning the competition.
Obviously, Dundee United suffering with COVID problems there as well, but they look to be over them. I think Stevie Frail, the assistant manager, is still to come back for that. But it should be a good one. It's one I'll be at, so hopefully it's not too much of a bitter December afternoon in Leith. Rangers v Motherwell is another one. Motherwell in a bit of a poor run of form just now, and playing an angry Rangers team is probably the last thing they need, Jordan.
Yeah, it's going to be very tough for Motherwell. I was looking at something earlier in the week though about how Rangers, obviously there's been a pattern in terms of them slipping up at crucial points in the season, but league games following cup defeats, I think haven't won any of them. So there's a bit of hope for Robinson et al. But I think if you go on league form at the minute, Motherwell have been very disappointing. I think I was at the game that beat Ross County 4-0, and they were excellent that day, looked by far the better team, but just haven't really been able to produce that, have they, with any consistency, despite having, when you look at their team lining up against a lot of the other sides, you think they have some good quality in there and players that can affect things sort of at both ends of the pitch, but that's not really happening at the minute, and it is hard to see them getting something at Ibrox. I think you would think that it's a different Rangers than the ones that have stuttered and stuff before. Although I think St Mirren showed that it is possible the weekend or in midweek, but bigger pitch at Ibrox, and he'll not be mucking about team wise, Gerrard. So it'll be, as you say, an angry Rangers. It's a very, very big ask for Motherwell, I think.
Yeah, because I think if you look at Ibrox form, Motherwell's last win at Ibrox came when I wasn't born. It was in 1997. So in my lifetime, Motherwell literally never won in the league at Ibrox. And I think generally, Stephen Robinson touched on it a bit this morning. We'll hear from him in a wee bit, but generally his record against the Old Firm in the league hasn't been great at all. I don't think he's actually managed to get a league win over either Celtic or Rangers, albeit he's beat Rangers a couple of times in the Cup. But overall, I mean, if you exclude those 6 points from Motherwell, they're in 15 points, and that's joint 10th. 6 league wins all year, 2 of which came against Ross County, 2 of came against Aberdeen. So obviously they need to pick up a wee bit, Motherwell. But I don't think when they're sitting in 5th, albeit they get handed 6 of those points, you can't really complain too much if you're a Motherwell fan in the grand scheme of things. But we heard from Stephen Robinson ahead of the Wells trip to Ibrox.
Of course, it's Rangers can obviously are not invincible. That's what's proved, and if everything goes your way, it was sort of the perfect storm, so to speak. The weather was horrendous, pitch was a bit wobbly, and maybe Rangers didn't play to the top of their game. So you need all 3 of those things to happen. Credit to St Mirren. They got a result. They dug in. They stayed in the game. They defended well, and I think that's the key to it. You have to go to Ibrox. I feel it'll be a completely different game, bigger pitch, and better surface. I would imagine their team will change as well. So it'll be a tough ask no matter what. We won't be fooled by a one-off result. I don't think it certainly won't be heads down after the run they've been on. They're a top side, as I say, the best Rangers side I've seen in my time here as Motherwell manager. So we have to be again right at the top of our game. We're gonna have to defend very well. That's what I got out of the game the other night. It was people throwing their bodies on the line. And you have to do that, and you have to hope that Rangers don't hit the top of their game. But what it does, it gives you a little bit of hope that they're not invincible. Yeah, I mean, James top player, but if you stop him, then you got Barris that's the other side. Stop them 2, and then you got Devo in the middle and Kamara. So listen, they've got strength all over the pitch, and there's not one right way to do it. As I say, we are well aware of Rangers' threats, and we'll set up to hopefully cope with them. Again, small things have to go your way, Ben. We had 2 penalties given away, and that arguably now might or might not be given. The rule might change, it might not change, depends how the interpretation is. So straight away, when things don't go your way, you're in trouble. We didn't play well. We didn't do the basics right, and if you play any of the top teams and you don't do the basics right, you have to be disciplined. You have to stay in the game as long as you possibly can. And as I say, both 18-yard boxes are vital. What happens in between that won't win or loses the game. How we defend our 18-yard box, and when we get our opportunities, better delivery of balls, better decision making in that final third.
Ross County Hamilton up in Dingwall is probably arguably game of the weekend in terms of importance in the overall season for both of these clubs. Both down at the bottom, both look like they'll probably be the ones fighting to at least stay off 12. Perhaps these 2 are the favourites for that 11th spot, and obviously 12th going into that. A massive game, and perhaps not going to be a pretty game of football, but it's not going to matter. It's the 3 points that's going to be very important at the end of this one, perhaps in May as well.
Yeah, as you say, I don't think it'll be one necessarily for the purists, or maybe it will be one for the purists in terms of someone that likes to be out in the cold. In December, watching 2 teams scrap it out, I think it is massive in terms of for both the clubs. Ross County are the only ones I've seen this year, and they have looked limited at times. I think the record either side of that win at Celtic Park was obviously that was a massive achievement, but the record outside of that has been really poor, and they've struggled for goals, struggled at the back, and I think Stewart's a big player. Stephen Kelly probably in midfield as well. But I think they need to create more, and then they need to be more clinical in the chances that they create. But yeah, it's a massive game for them. Home advantage, but I think Hamilton were in such a bad place a month or so ago, and it's not quite looking as bleak as it was back then. And there's a little bit more hope, and they do it every year. Like, obviously they're quite vocal about the fact that everyone predicts them to go down, and then they never do. And somehow, I think over the summer, when you saw the amount of players that were letting go, and the fact that their squad was so diminished and stuff, I had no real thought that there was any way that they were going to be able to stay up this season. But they still managed to pick up points, and over the next, there's still a long part of the season to go, and you can't put it past them picking up points and really raising things as it gets towards the business end of stuff. So yeah, a really big game for both sides, but I think it probably a good draw. I think.
Yeah, I think if Aki's win it, 4 points above adrift Ross County will be, and then that wee gap starts to get created as well. So perhaps a draw maybe suits Accies a wee bit more than it does Ross County at this stage, but given where both of them are, it's 11th v 12th. I think both of them sort of need a victory in this one. St Mirren St Johnstone's the other one. Before we talk a wee bit about that game, I'm going to give you a lengthy chat with Jim Goodwin at today's press conference. Obviously, you'll have seen the news about concussion protocols and substitutes being brought into football, and Jim Goodwin's been pretty open about that, about how he suffered a fractured skull at Scunthorpe on his second season against Bristol City, and how he managed to play on with the fractured skull and then metal plate in his head going forward from that.
Probably headed the ball far too many times myself, and I know that I've had numerous concussions. I've had numerous clashes of heads. I think back to my debut for Scunthorpe a number of years ago, where I fractured my skull in the 12th minute of the first game of the season, and I played on to half time knowing that there was something seriously wrong with me, but I didn't want to come off the park, and it wasn't until half time when I started being sick and I started having blood actually coming from my nose that the physio and the doctor at the time made the decision to bring me off. So I think it's a really important decision from the authorities, and one that I would certainly welcome.
How did you be allowed to continue playing with that? I'm assuming obviously you knew there was something wrong, but surely the doctor should have identified something.
No, look, I mean, I don't blame the medical team at the time because they were very, very good. It was a clash of heads. It was actually with Liam Fontaine, who is still up here at the moment. Liam was playing for Bristol City, and I was obviously playing for Scunthorpe, and the two of us clashed heads. It happens all the time, and I did have a big bump on my head, but there wasn't a cut, so there was no real obvious fracture there that was identifiable to the physio at the time. But I did know. I knew at half time once the blood started coming from the kind of front of my head down through the inside of my skull out my nose. I knew then that something had seriously happened. So yeah, went for the X-ray and got the operation, and I've now got a metal plate in the front of my head. But these are the things that we now we're too far on in terms of medical science and everything else, and we're too far on now to be taking any risks with players' welfare. I know back in the day, long before my time, it was considered brave and courageous to carry on with these things, but I don't want to be taking any risks with any of my players. In fact, when I think back to a game I had at Livingston with Alloa, Andy Graham was my centre half, and the big man fell out with me for about a month because I took him off after the head knock. I just knew he didn't look right, and I dragged him. He wanted to play on. But I think as managers, we've got to take responsibility, and I think we have got to make those difficult decisions at times, even if they are key players, to protect the long-term future of the player. It's not just about the here and now, it's about 20 and 30 years from now.
Yeah, because you've seen down south, like Raul Jimenez, I think at Wolves, obviously fractured his skull. I mean, that would compared to what your treatment of it was, I know you don't blame the doctors and stuff, but the treatment and stuff is very different from what it was 10, 15 years ago.
Well, of course it is. Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, things are improving all the time, and it is a freak accident. People break legs and do cruciate ligaments all the time. For someone to fracture their skull on the football pitch is a real rarity, but it did happen to me, and Peter Cech, in fact, and I used to laugh about it because Peter Cech done his head probably about 6 weeks after I'd done mine, and Peter Cech had about a 3-inch scar on the side of his head because he's obviously got the money to go private, whereas I've got a scar. If I shave my head, I've got a scar from one side of my head right across the top to the other. So I don't know how Scunthorpe didn't have the money at the time to pay for it, but I ended up with a scar from one ear to the other right over the top of my head, whereas if you do it properly and you go private, then you get a little 3-inch scar on the side of your head. So, yeah, they are a freak accident. It happens, but I think we're never going to take heading out of the game. I can't see that happening. There is always going to be accidents. It's just important that the medical team are given the power to make those big decisions. And if we need to bring in independent doctors who make those decisions for us, then so be it. But me as a manager, I'm quite happy to take responsibility to protect the players.
Well, that's probably a decent story for you to tell the grandkids in a few years' time. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons I had to grow my hair, to be honest, because I went on holiday not long after it, the following summer, and some little kid at the pool thought it was a fantastic design, and he thought my barber had actually done it. So I'm well covered up now with my hair, thankfully.
Right, I obviously good to see Jim's on the mend now. I think he looks a bit better than he did then. But it's a crazy injury. It just shows sort of how. I mean, if you can imagine now, if you tried to make somebody like Jim play on with a head knock like that, it just would not happen, would it?
No, there would be an outcry. I think there are sort of. I think every sport has sort of been a little bit slow to cotton on to maybe how dangerous it is and that sort of stuff. But I think football's sort of in a position where it now has to follow and get in line with other sports. Say like rugby is obviously a bit of a, well, when you say a pioneer, but it's more prevalent there in terms of head knocks, and the cricket's gone that way as well, and there needs to be provisions for it, because you can't. I think it was David Lees, wasn't it, in the Premier League recently, was cutting about with that sort of Terry Butcher stuff around his head, and you can't really be having that and taking risks like that. So yeah, it's a good thing to put in place. And talking about Jim Goodwin though, like, how much better a position is he in than he was a month ago?
Crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, fans. I don't, because of how revered he is in Paisley, like he's a St Mirren legend, Jim Goodwin, and always will be. But they looked not so much out ideas, but it looked like it just wasn't happening with him, whatever that was happening with COVID and all that. But the way he's turned it around is crazy. I think we said at the start of the season, on a couple of different things, is that if they manage to get their 11 together, then they'll pretty much win most games 1-0, 2-1. Wednesday's the exception to that, because I mean St Mirren scoring 3 in a game's unheard of. Never mind the circumstances they scored in, but 10 games unbeaten for them now, which makes this weekend a bit more interesting, because St Johnstone are just off the back of an 11-game unbeaten run. St Mirren are on a 10-game unbeaten run, and it's 9th v 10th. Don't know.
Yeah, that is quite mental. It is. It's an interesting. That's an interesting game. It's because St Mirren and I sort of not in the spotlight, but a little bit more than they were, because they were obviously ticking along and before the Rangers game, and that maybe that unbeaten run was going under the radar a little bit. But I think they are so well organised at the back. They really do lack goals going forward, and I think they're going to get 9 in the league, which is a really small return. But defensively, they're really good, and it's something that I think always sticks out if a manager's bringing players in from somewhere he knows, i.e. Jim Goodwin, the League of Ireland, or Irish players in that, and see if you back yourself in that sort of situation where you can bring guys in for cheap or relatively cheap, and they do a good job for you. It reflects so well on him. And Connolly's dangerous down the right, and McGrath's obviously coming up with the goods, and then in the middle of the fence they're just really solid. So good time to be a St Mirren fan, I think, going forward. And a month ago, you would say it was an awful time to be. So, pretty dramatic turnaround.
I think it is with them, but I mean, if they go and get beat against St Johnstone, then it's like it's a bit of a dampener, because then they could potentially find themselves back in the relegation spots and stuff. But I mean,
they're not out of the woods. Like,
no, nobody from 5th, nobody from Motherwell to Ross County, only Aberdeen, Hibs, and then obviously Celtic and Rangers are safe. Hamilton could lose on Saturday, drop to bottom, and still be 7 points off 5th.
That's tight.
It's very tight. There's nobody is safe in the sort of 5th to 12th. So literally 2 or 3 wins in a row, and I think you'll slowly see St Mirren and St Johnstone starting to climb the table, and then everybody else will get a bit of catching up to do. Yep, I am fairly silly. I have said throughout this, there's 4 Premiership fixtures on this weekend. Of course there's not. There's 5. Me, in my notes, decided to forget that we had a Sunday fixture. So apologies to Kilmarnock and Aberdeen fans. And it's one not the Old Firm's going to be at as well. So an unforgivable error on my part. But nonetheless, filling it in now, Kilmarnock v Aberdeen at Rugby Park. That goes on the same day as the Scottish Cup final. Really interesting one. so interesting that I forgot about it. But in all seriousness, a really interesting tie. This obviously Kilmarnock in a bit of a tough patch just now. Obviously, the loss to Accies and then a disappointing second half against Celtic, albeit a 2-0 defeat away to Parkhead isn't the worst thing in the world. But Alex Dyer wasn't shy in his criticism of his players for their second half performance. So maybe we'll see a few changes from that side. And then Aberdeen as well, looking to continue their push, at least for third. I mean, it's been talked about whether the form of Celtic could lead to the likes of Aberdeen and Hibs splitting the Old Firm this season. Of course, you've got Rangers at the top as well, and it remains to be seen whether they can keep that domestic charge going. But they will perhaps have one eye on that, but perhaps more pressingly, they will have one eye on pushing for third as well. Obviously, Hibs play the day before as well, so that might put a wee bit of pressure on them, depending how Hibs go against Dundee United. But similarly, if they don't get the result they want in that, Aberdeen could have a big incentive going to Rugby Park. So that's a 12 o'clock kickoff. We'll be there for that one. That takes place just before the big kickoff at Hampden as well. So plenty of Scottish football action for us to enjoy on Sunday. So right, back to the actual main video that we recorded earlier this afternoon. Bye. That's sort of the weekend's fixtures. I hope you have enjoyed this sort of wee preview. A busy weekend, a busy month, and a busy few weeks coming up as well after the Christmas period. Scottish Cup gets back underway. You got the Scottish Cup final from last season as well on Sunday, which promises to be a good one, whether Hearts can shock Celtic or not. And as well as that, we'll have lots of exclusive interviews and stuff over the course. We'll have one in the Christmas week as well. Former Mull defender, former Sheffield United defender as of last season as well. So don't miss that one. And until next time, subscribe to our channel, like the video,